The first strike. The Galactic Empire had never taken humanity seriously. To them, Earth and its people were primitive, backward even. A planet full of outdated technology, held together by old, clunky ships and weapons that were long past their prime. The Empire, with its fleets of advanced starships and powerful weaponry, looked at Earth with contempt. On the outer edge of the galaxy, humanity's colonies were growing, expanding, but to the Empire, they were no threat. They were small, insignificant blips on the map, easy to squash under the boot of the Empire's mighty forces. They thought war would break humanity, that Earth was no match for the technological might of the Empire. One day, without warning, the Empire decided to make its move. The attack was swift, brutal, and relentless. A massive fleet, numbering in the thousands, appeared in the skies over one of humanity's most peaceful colonies, a planet named Vartus. The people of Vartus had no idea what was coming. They were simply going about their day when the sky darkened with the shadow of Empire warships. The sudden appearance of the fleet sent waves of panic throughout the colony. For a moment, there was no sound but the rush of fear. But then, something strange happened. Instead of chaos, there was calm. The colony's leaders immediately went into a state of emergency, but they weren't panicking. They didn't run. They didn't flee. They prepared. They knew that they had no choice but to fight, and they would fight like their ancestors did, without hesitation. They trusted their training, their history, and most importantly, their will to survive. As the Empire's fleet began to lower their shields and prepare to unleash devastating firepower, they were met with a message that stunned them to their core. The screen on every one of their ships flickered, and a voice came through. It was clear, calm, and chillingly confident. You wanted war. Now you'll learn how it's truly fought. For a moment, the entire fleet fell silent. The Empire's commanders stared at the screen, bewildered. What was this? A declaration of defiance. A challenge to their power. Then something unexpected happened. The space around the fleet seemed to warp. At first, it was barely noticeable, a shimmer in the void of space. But then, it became impossible to ignore. The sky, once dark with the shadows of Empire ships, began to be filled with something else, human warships. But these were not the outdated, slow vessels the Empire had seen before. No, these were something else entirely. The ships moved with speed and precision, like a swarm of angry hornets, darting through the darkness of space. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, as if they had been hiding right under the Empire's nose all along. The Empire fleet tried to react, their own ships scrambling to reposition and raise shields. But they were too slow, too disoriented. It was clear now, this wasn't the human fleet they had expected. Humanity had been hiding its true strength for years, biding its time, preparing for the moment when they would be forced to defend themselves. And now that moment had arrived. The first strike was quick, efficient, and devastating. Humanity's ships fired with deadly accuracy, targeting the Empire's most vulnerable points. Energy shields, meant to protect the Empire's ships from any attack, flickered under the onslaught. But it wasn't just the firepower of the human ships that caught the Empire off guard. It was the tactics. The humans didn't fight like they were in some high-tech war. No, they fought like they had something to prove. The battle raged on, with explosions lighting up the dark expanse of space. The Empire's fleet was in disarray, trying desperately to regroup and counterattack. But they weren't prepared for the speed and ferocity of the human assault. As the battle unfolded, a chilling realization spread through the Empire's ranks. They had underestimated humanity. They had thought that the humans were weak, that their outdated weapons were no match for the Empire's advanced technology. But in reality, those so-called outdated weapons were part of a greater strategy, one that the Empire had failed to understand. The humans didn't need the most advanced technology to win. They just needed the will to fight, the resolve to push back when everything seemed lost. And now the Empire was seeing just how far humanity would go to protect its people, its colonies, and its way of life. Back on Earth, high in the command centers, military leaders watched in silence as their forces held their ground. They knew this was only the beginning. They knew that the Empire would send more fleets, more ships, more soldiers. But it didn't matter. The message had been sent, loud and clear. Humanity would not bow down. They would not surrender. They would fight, and they would win. As the first wave of battle subsided, the message from Earth was sent again. It was broadcasted across the galaxy, a final warning to the Empire. You chose war. Now we will show you how it's truly fought. The Empire's commanders exchanged looks of disbelief. The arrogance of their initial attack had blinded them to the true strength of their enemy. They had believed that humanity was weak, unprepared, and unwilling to fight. But now they understood. Humanity was not to be underestimated. And this war, this fight, was only just beginning. The galaxy had underestimated the power of humanity, and now they would pay the price for their mistake. As the stars flickered above Vartus, the human warships regrouped, preparing for the next phase of the battle. They knew the Empire would strike again, and they would be ready. But one thing was certain: the Empire's underestimation of humanity's strength would be their downfall. The Empire's forces reeled from the first strike, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Their confidence, once unshakable, now wavered as their ships burned in the void. The battle should have been over before it even began. They had expected an easy victory, a swift conquest of an inferior species, but instead they found themselves facing an enemy that refused to break. On the bridge of the Empire's flagship, High Commander Varric stared at the battlefield, his claws gripping the edges of his console. He had led invasions across dozens of worlds, crushed countless civilizations beneath the might of the Empire, but never had he seen a battle unfold like this. The humans were not fighting with desperation. They were fighting with precision, with strategy, with the kind of experience that came not from mere survival, but from mastering the art of war. Status report. Varric barked, his voice laced with frustration. Shields are failing across multiple vessels. An officer responded, his voice trembling. Their weapons, it's as if they know exactly where to strike. Varric clenched his jaw. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to scatter, to flee, to beg for mercy. But they were not running. They were pressing forward, pushing the Empire's forces back with relentless efficiency. Their ships, though smaller, moved like predators, striking with lethal accuracy before vanishing into the darkness. The Empire's ships had superior firepower, but that firepower meant nothing if they couldn't land a clean shot. Every time they locked onto a target, the human ships moved unpredictably, weaving through the battlefield in ways that defied logic. The Empire had relied too much on overwhelming strength, and now they were paying the price for their arrogance. Varric turned his attention to the communication panel, his mind racing. If the humans had prepared for this moment, then there was a high chance that reinforcements were already on the way. They had underestimated humanity once. He would not make that mistake again. Deploy the second wave, he ordered. Crush them before they gain any more ground. Across the battlefield, massive Empire warships surged forward, their cannons charging with enough firepower to level entire cities. The order was clear: wipe the humans out before they could regroup. But the humans had already anticipated this. As the second wave advanced, the battlefield shifted once again. Human ships began falling back, not in retreat, but in a coordinated maneuver that led the Empire's forces into a carefully laid trap. The moment the Empire's fleet crossed into the designated zone, hidden weapon platforms, previously dormant in the darkness of space, activated all at once. Energy beams and missile barrages erupted from unseen locations, slamming into the exposed flanks of the Empire's ships. Explosions rippled through their ranks, tearing apart their formations before they even had a chance to adjust. Varric's eyes widened in shock as half his second wave was annihilated in a matter of seconds. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "How did they know?" The truth was becoming painfully clear. Humanity had never been unprepared. They had been waiting, watching, learning. And now they were proving to the galaxy that they were not just survivors. They were conquerors in their own right. On board one of the human command ships, Captain Elias watched the destruction unfold with a grim expression. He had fought in countless skirmishes before, but this was different. This was not just about defending a colony. This was about sending a message to the Empire and to the entire galaxy. For too long, humanity had been seen as weak, as a primitive species barely worthy of notice. But today, that perception was being shattered. Today, the Empire was learning a painful lesson. "Commander," a voice crackled through the comms. "They're breaking formation. We have them on the run." Elias exhaled slowly. This was only the beginning. "Good," he said, "but we don't let them escape. Not yet. They need to understand that this is their mistake to regret." With that, the next phase of humanity's counterattack began. The Empire had wanted war. Now, humanity would show them exactly how it was fought. The battlefield was no longer a clash between two forces. It was a massacre. The Empire's fleet, once so confident, now struggled to hold its ground. Their warships, built for intimidation and raw power, were proving useless against an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. High Commander Varric watched in horror as yet another one of his capital ships erupted into flames, breaking apart in the void. His fleet was supposed to dominate. The humans were supposed to be nothing more than an inconvenience. But now, their tactics, their precision, their sheer ruthlessness in battle, it all pointed to a terrifying truth. Humanity had been underestimated. "Commander," a frantic voice broke through the comms. "We've lost over 40% of our forces. Their ships keep outmaneuvering us. And their counterattacks." "Enough." Varric snapped, his claws digging into the console. "I don't want excuses. I want results." But deep inside, he knew there was no turning this around. The humans had prepared for this battle far better than he had ever imagined. And worse, they were enjoying it. Across the battlefield, the humans pressed their advantage. Unlike the Empire's rigid formations, human forces moved like a pack of wolves, striking fast and tearing apart their enemies before disappearing into the darkness. Their ships weren't just surviving against the Empire. They were dismantling them piece by piece. The Empire's forces had always relied on their overwhelming firepower, but the humans had turned that strength into a weakness. Every time the Empire tried to fire their devastating weapons, the humans forced them to hesitate, never giving them a clear shot. Their battleships, massive and powerful, were simply too slow to react. On board the human flagship Valor's Edge, Captain Elias leaned forward, his eyes locked on the tactical display. He could see it happening. The Empire's formation was breaking apart. Their discipline, their training, it all meant nothing when their enemy refused to play by the rules. "Admiral, they're trying to regroup," one of the officers reported. Elias smirked. "No, they're trying to run." The Empire's fleet was beginning to retreat, their once mighty armada now a scattered mess. Some ships attempted to fight back, but most were fleeing, desperate to escape the slaughter. "Do we pursue?" another officer asked. Elias considered it. The logical choice would be to let them go, to end the battle here and declare victory. But that wasn't enough. The Empire needed to understand that this was only the beginning. "Prepare for a full-scale pursuit," Elias ordered. "We're not letting them leave unscathed." The order was relayed instantly, and within moments, the human fleet surged forward, chasing down the remnants of the Empire's forces. The Empire had started this war, but humanity would be the ones to finish it. High Commander Varric's mind raced as he watched his forces crumble. He had never seen an enemy fight like this. The humans weren't just defeating them. They were dismantling them. turning their war machine into nothing more than burning wreckage. He had to escape. "Prepare the flagship for a tactical retreat," he ordered. "Now." But as his officers scrambled to carry out his command, the ship suddenly shook violently. The alarms blared as a massive explosion rocked the hull. "We've been hit," an officer shouted. "They found us." A new voice crackled through the comms, cold, calm, and unmistakably human. "Running away already?" Elias said. "I expected more from the mighty Empire." Varric's blood turned to ice. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of the battle so completely that even he, one of the Empire's most experienced commanders, was now nothing more than a hunted target. "Listen to me, human," Varric growled, trying to reclaim some sense of authority. "If you let us go, the Empire will." "The Empire will do nothing," Elias interrupted. "Because after today, the galaxy will know that humanity is not to be trifled with." Another explosion shook the flagship. The shields were gone. The engines were failing. Varric had seconds left. As he looked out at the battlefield, watching his Empire's once great fleet burn, he realized the truth. The humans hadn't been lucky. They hadn't just been strong. They had been ready. And now, the Empire would pay for its arrogance. The battlefield had turned into a graveyard of wreckage. The once mighty fleet of the Empire, proud and undefeated for centuries, was now reduced to burning debris scattered across the void. What few ships remained were either fleeing in desperation or barely holding together under the relentless human assault. Aboard the human flagship Valor's Edge, Captain Elias observed the chaos with a cold, calculating gaze. This was not just a victory. It was a message. "Sir, enemy flagship is attempting to retreat," an officer reported. Elias leaned forward, studying the tactical display. The enemy command ship, a towering behemoth of metal and firepower, was limping away, its once impenetrable shields flickering and failing. "Not fast enough," Elias murmured. The Empire had come expecting an easy war, assuming their superior technology and numbers would crush humanity without resistance. Instead, they had walked into a nightmare. "Send the Black Vipers in pursuit," Elias ordered. Within seconds, a squadron of sleek, dark-painted human fighters broke formation and shot toward the escaping enemy flagship. Unlike the Empire's heavy, slow-moving warships, these fighters were built for speed and precision. Inside the Empire's failing command ship, High Commander Varric was barely holding himself together. His officers were scrambling, shouting over one another, desperate for orders. "Sir, our engines are failing. We have hull breaches on multiple decks. Communications are down. We can't signal for reinforcements." Varric clenched his fists. This wasn't just a defeat. It was a humiliation. The Empire was supposed to be invincible. The humans were supposed to be primitive savages, not an enemy capable of destroying entire fleets. A sharp alarm blared through the bridge. "Incoming enemy fighters." Varric turned just in time to see them on the main display. Dozens of human attack ships closing in fast, their weapons locked onto his flagship. For a moment, fear threatened to consume him. "They don't fight like any species we've encountered before," he muttered under his breath. The humans had no interest in traditional warfare. No honor, no negotiation. They fought with ruthless efficiency, exploiting every weakness, striking without hesitation. A bright flash of light filled the bridge as the first wave of human torpedoes struck. The ship rocked violently, throwing officers from their stations. Sparks flew as consoles exploded, and smoke filled the air. "Shields are gone. Weapons offline. Sir, we won't survive another attack." Varric's mind raced. There was only one option left. "Prepare the escape pods," he ordered. The officers stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, you mean to abandon the ship?" Varric glared at them. "This battle is lost. If we stay, we die. If we escape, we live to warn the Empire about what these humans are capable of." Reluctantly, his officers obeyed. Emergency klaxons blared as the escape pods were launched one by one. Back aboard Valor's Edge, Captain Elias watched the flagship's desperate evacuation with cold amusement. "They're running like cowards," one of his officers commented. "That's what happens when you start a war you can't win," Elias replied. His finger hovered over the command console. He could give the order. One more barrage, and the enemy flagship would be erased from existence. But instead, he smiled. "Let them go," he said finally. "They need to carry the message back to their leaders." The officer frowned. "Sir." Elias leaned back in his chair. "They need to live long enough to tell the rest of the Empire what happened here today. To tell them that humanity is not weak, that we are not to be underestimated." As the last escape pod drifted into the darkness, the shattered remains of the Empire's fleet burned in silence. The war had begun. But now it was humanity's turn to decide how it would end. The wreckage of the Empire's fleet drifted lifelessly through the void, illuminated by the distant light of a burning star. Smoke and fire still clung to the ruined husks of their once mighty warships, their remains scattered like the bones of a long-dead beast. The silence was haunting, a silence that only came after overwhelming devastation. Aboard Valor's Edge, Captain Elias stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the view before him. The battle had been decisive. The Empire had thought themselves untouchable, believing their superior technology would make this war nothing more than a show of force. They had been wrong. "Sir," Lieutenant Carter spoke from the tactical console, breaking the quiet tension on the bridge. "We've detected multiple distress signals from the remaining Empire vessels. Survivors are requesting rescue." Elias didn't react immediately. He simply continued to stare out into the blackness of space, where hundreds of enemy ships had once stood in defiance. Now, they were nothing but debris. "How many?" he asked at last. "At least 12 ships still have functioning life support, though barely. Escape pods are drifting near the wreckage, hundreds of them. Some are trying to reach Empire-controlled space. Others, well, they don't have anywhere to go." Elias exhaled slowly. The thought of the Empire's soldiers, defeated, broken, stranded, should have given him some satisfaction. They had invaded. They had threatened humanity. They had fired the first shot. And yet, part of him hesitated. "Captain," another officer, Commander Reynolds, stepped forward. "If we leave them, they'll die. But if we rescue them, they could be a threat." A moment of silence stretched across the bridge. Elias turned, his expression unreadable. "They didn't show mercy when they attacked us." "No, sir," Reynolds agreed. "They didn't." Carter looked uneasy. "So, do we let them die?" Before Elias could answer, a new voice interrupted. "Captain, incoming transmission," the communications officer reported. It's from one of the surviving Empire ships. They're surrendering." Surrender. The word hung in the air, foreign and strange. The Empire was known for its pride, for its unwavering belief in its own superiority. Surrender was not in their nature. "Patch it through," Elias ordered. A moment later, the whole screen flickered to life, revealing the weary and bloodied face of an Empire officer. His uniform was torn, and smoke filled the background behind him. His face was hardened with the shame of defeat. "This is Admiral Cal of the Empire's Third Fleet," the alien said, his voice strained but steady. "I acknowledge our failure. Our forces are destroyed. Our command ship is gone. We have no means to fight. We request mercy." The bridge was silent. No one spoke. Elias studied Cal's face. The once proud warrior now looked like a man stripped of everything he had once believed in. "You attacked us without warning," Elias said, his voice even. "You called us primitive. You thought we would break under your might." Cal closed his eyes briefly. "We were wrong." Elias turned to his officers. Some looked conflicted, others furious. Carter, the youngest among them, looked the most troubled. Finally, Elias spoke. "You will surrender unconditionally. he said firmly. Your surviving men will be taken as prisoners of war. You will cooperate fully with our forces. If you resist, we will leave you here to die. Kale exhaled sharply, a mixture of relief and humiliation crossing his face. We accept. The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Carter muttered, I never thought I'd see the day the Empire would beg us for mercy. Reynolds exhaled through his nose. They won't forget this humiliation. Elias nodded. No, they won't. He turned back toward the stars. This war was far from over. But now, the Empire had learned a bitter truth. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not weak. And if the Empire ever dared to return, they would learn just how far humanity was willing to go. The remains of the Empire's once mighty fleet floated lifelessly in the void, the silence of space punctuated only by the occasional explosion from a ruined warship. The battle was over. Humanity had won. But the war, that was far from finished. Aboard Valor's Edge, Captain Elias stood at the bridge, his fingers gripping the railing as he watched the wreckage drift through space. The Empire had underestimated them, believed them to be weak, primitive, unworthy of standing among the stars. Now those same arrogant warriors were sending desperate distress signals, begging for help. Sir, we have finished collecting the escape pods, Lieutenant Carter reported. Most of them surrendered without resistance. Some chose death over capture. Elias nodded but said nothing. He had expected that. The Empire had always taught its soldiers that surrender was worse than death. Even now, those beliefs held strong. Commander Reynolds approached, his voice low. We received a response from the Empire's high command. Elias turned, and Reynolds hesitated for a moment, then said, they refuse to acknowledge our victory. They say this was merely a tactical setback. They promise retaliation. Elias exhaled through his nose. Of course they do. The Empire would never accept defeat so easily. They had spent centuries expanding, crushing any who opposed them. They would not let one lost battle change their ways. Do we have any intel on their next move? Elias asked. Reynolds nodded grimly. Our scouts intercepted encrypted transmissions. We're decoding them now, but from what we've gathered, they're preparing a counterattack. A large one. They want to wipe us out before word of their failure spreads. Silence fell over the bridge. They can't afford to let the rest of the galaxy see them lose. Carter muttered. If they do, other species might start resisting them too. Elias clenched his jaw. The Empire's pride wouldn't allow them to retreat, but their fear of appearing weak made them even more dangerous. The comms officer turned in his seat. Sir, we just received a message from Earth. The High Command is ordering all fleets to prepare for immediate defense. They're mobilizing every available warship. Elias didn't look away from the burning wreckage outside the window. He had known this was coming. The Empire would return, stronger, angrier, more determined than before. And this time, they would not hold back. Send a message to High Command, he ordered. Tell them we'll be ready. Reynolds stepped forward. Sir, if they're coming back with everything they have, can we win? Elias turned to him, his eyes cold, his voice steady. They thought war would break humanity, he said. Now we show them how it's truly fought. The stars were quiet. Too quiet. Aboard Valor's Edge, Captain Elias stood on the bridge, watching the vast emptiness of space stretch before them. The Imperial fleet was coming. They had promised vengeance, and now their ships were closing in like a storm on the horizon. Admiral Carter reports all fleets are in position. Commander Reynolds said, his voice low but steady. Elias nodded. Across the system, humanity's forces were ready. Every warship, every station, every hidden defensive platform was primed for battle. Earth had sent everything it had. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a message. The Empire had chosen war. Now, they would learn what that truly meant. A warning siren echoed through the bridge. Contacts detected. The sensor officer called out. Multiple enemy ships, inbound at high velocity. The view screen flickered, displaying the approaching fleet. Hundreds of Imperial warships, each one bristling with weapons. This was not just a retaliation force. This was an armada meant to burn humanity from the stars. Reynolds clenched his fists. They're bringing everything they have. Elias remained calm. Good. A moment later, the comms officer turned, his face pale. We're receiving a transmission from the Imperial flagship. Elias gave a slight nod. Put it through. The screen shifted, revealing a towering figure clad in ornate armor. Grand Admiral Xorath of the Imperial fleet glared down at them, his reptilian eyes filled with contempt. Humans, he spat. Your defiance ends today. We offered you mercy once, and you threw it away. Now we will wipe your kind from existence. Elias tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice calm and unwavering. You made a mistake, Admiral. Xorath sneered. And what mistake would that be? Elias took a step forward. You thought war would break humanity. You thought we would kneel. But war is not your weapon. His eyes burned with cold fire. It's ours. With a single gesture, he gave the order. Across the system, hidden human warships decloaked. Stealth destroyers emerged from asteroid belts. Defense platforms activated, their massive cannons charging with energy. The Empire had walked into a trap. And then the void erupted. Missiles screamed through space. Railguns fired with deadly precision. Human warships surged forward, cutting through the Imperial fleet like blades through flesh. The battle was chaos. Explosions tore through the darkness. Imperial ships buckled under relentless fire. Humanity's fleet moved with brutal efficiency, using tactics the Empire had never seen before. On the Imperial flagship, Grand Admiral Xorath watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. This is impossible, he roared. We are the Empire. We are invincible. But deep down, he knew the truth. They had thought war would break humanity. Instead, it had unleashed them. As Valor's Edge fired its final shot, Xorath's flagship was engulfed in flames. The Empire's fleet shattered, its survivors fleeing in terror. Humanity had won. But they were not finished. Elias stood on the bridge, watching the wreckage drift through space. Send a message, he said, to every surviving Imperial ship. Tell them what happened here today. Reynolds nodded. And what do we tell them? Elias turned, his voice cold as steel. Tell them, this was just the beginning.